In the heart of the red-soiled lands of Mba village, where the winds whispered through the tall baobab trees and children ran barefoot on the dusty paths, there lived an old man named Babu Tembo, a respected elder known for his wisdom and silent strength. His wealth was not measured in gold or cattle but in land, heritage, and the love of a community that had watched him raise his only son, Kato. After the passing of his wife years ago, Tembo had poured every breath of his existence into raising Kato, shielding him from pain, struggle, and even the brutal lessons of heartbreak. Kato, now a grown man with a chiseled jaw, broad shoulders, and eyes as deep as the river Nile, was the pride of the village women, yet the shame of their mothers. For despite all the pleading, praying, and parading of eligible maidens, Kato refused to marry. "Love is a lie," he would say, his voice distant, "a thing that weak men chase while the world devours them." The villagers speculated endlessly. Some said he had lost someone in secret, others whispered that the spirits had cursed him. But Babu Tembo knew the truth. Kato feared being vulnerable, feared needing someone, feared being like his father who had never stopped loving his dead wife. Tembo, however, had one final plan. He had spent his life giving his son everything but had never taught him how to choose wisely. So, one moonless night, Babu Tembo packed his fine robes into a bundle, smeared his face with ash, tore his own sandals, and wrapped his wealthy identity in rags. At dawn, he left his compound, walked down into the bustling market square dressed as a beggar, and sat quietly at the edge of the well, bowl in hand, eyes lowered, heart pounding not from fear but purpose. Word of the strange old beggar spread like fire through dry grass. He didn't speak much, didn't eat much, and yet he smiled at every insult, shared every morsel, and never cursed even the cruelest merchants. Days turned into weeks, and many mocked him, but one young woman didn't. Nia, the blacksmith's orphaned niece, saw more than a beggar in Tembo. She would bring him roasted maize at dusk, patch the holes in his shirt with scraps of cloth, and speak to him with a kind of tenderness that no one had offered since his wife's death. "Why do you smile so much when people are so unkind?" she asked one evening, sitting beside him on a stone slab under the tree. "Because it's easier to feel sorry for them than to be angry," Tembo replied, glancing sideways at her. Nia was unlike the village girls with gold in their ears and silk in their hands. Her hands were coarse from work, her feet calloused from long walks, but her eyes, they sparkled with kindness and truth. One day, as fate would have it, Kato came to the market to purchase millet. From a distance, he saw his father, but not as his father. He saw a frail beggar being ridiculed by children, being shooed by merchants, and comforted only by a poor girl in a faded dress. Something stirred in Kato, but he dismissed it. "Another mad old man," he muttered and walked on. Yet something about that beggar haunted him. That evening, he returned quietly and watched as Nia placed a sweet potato in the beggar's bowl and sat to listen to his made-up stories. "Once upon a time," the old man was saying, "a prince forgot he was a prince until a pauper reminded him what royalty really meant." Nia laughed, genuinely, and Kato felt a sharp twist in his chest. For days he returned, watching from behind trees, eavesdropping on their conversations, and observing Nia's patience, gentleness, and quiet strength. He had known girls who wore perfume and danced at festivals, but none who could laugh with a beggar, stitch his torn cloak, and still walk away without asking for anything. He didn't know her name, only her actions, and those were enough to gnaw at his mind. Eventually, curiosity overtook pride. Kato approached the beggar one evening, handing him a mango. Tembo looked up, and for a second, their eyes locked, and perhaps Kato saw something familiar, something ancestral, but it slipped past him like a ghost in the mist. "Who is the girl?" Kato asked. Tembo chuckled. "A heart healer," he said. "She listens when no one speaks and speaks when silence becomes heavy." Kato frowned but said no more. Days later, when the rains came and most people stayed inside, Nia arrived soaked but smiling, carrying warm porridge for the beggar. Kato watched her from the shadows, mesmerized by her persistence. That night he could not sleep. Something was shifting inside him, something long buried. The next morning, Cato did something he had never done. He followed Nia home. Her hut was modest, her garden small, and her laughter pure. He watched her feed stray goats and help a blind neighbor tie firewood. He began helping too. First with excuses, then with intention. He fetched water, repaired her hut's roof, and even delivered grain from the store. Nia watched him cautiously at first, unsure of his sudden interest. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I don't know," he replied honestly, "but I feel lighter when I am." And so their connection deepened, wordlessly, without promises, like the slow filling of a calabash with rain. But just as warmth began to bloom in Cato's heart, disaster struck. The beggar fell ill. Tembo, weak from weeks of hardship and age, collapsed beside the well. The villagers ignored him. After all, he was just a beggar. Only Nia and Cato rushed to his side. Nia wept as she tended to him, and Cato, confused by the sorrow of losing someone he didn't even know, carried the old man to the healer's hut. For 3 days, Tembo faded in and out of fever, and Cato sat by his side. On the 4th night, when the storm clouds gathered and lightning carved the sky, Tembo opened his eyes and whispered, "Son." Cato froze. "What did you say?" Tembo smiled faintly. "I wanted to see if you could love someone who had nothing." The truth thundered louder than the skies. Cato stumbled back, staring at the frail man, recognizing the lines on his face, the shape of his hands, the scar on his temple. "Baba," he whispered, a storm breaking inside his chest. Tembo nodded. "And she loves you, Cato, not your wealth, not your name. She sees your soul." Cato wept that night for the first time in years, not from shame but from awakening. His father had worn rags to show him riches. And now, as dawn crept into the sky, Cato knew what he had to do. But would Nia ever forgive a man who had hidden the truth too? When morning arrived and the golden rays filtered through the healer's thatched hut, painting warm patterns on the floor, Cato sat still beside his father, wide-eyed and shaken, the truth still echoing in his heart like distant drums from a sacred ceremony. Nia entered silently with a clay pot of warm water and herbs, her face tired but radiant with quiet strength, and when she knelt beside the old man to wipe his forehead, Cato stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Not as the girl from the market, not the helper of a beggar, but as the woman who unknowingly helped bring his heart back to life. Guilt clung to his throat like dry ash. She didn't know. She didn't know that the man she had shared her food with, cried for, and comforted was not a beggar at all, but the wealthy elder of the village. And worse, she didn't know that the man who now stood beside her, acting humble, was not just another helpful stranger but the son of that beggar, the one whose pride had once scorned love. That afternoon, when Babu Tembo had fallen into restful sleep, Cato took Nia to the edge of the stream where the birds sang freely and the breeze whispered through tall reeds. "There is something I must confess," he began, voice heavy with shame, and he told her everything, from how he had watched her in the market, followed her home, and how the beggar was his father in disguise, testing the heart of a woman to see if she could be loved for who she was, not what she had. Nia listened in silence, not interrupting, not shifting, but her face grew still, like the calm before a storm. When he finished, her lips parted, but no words came. She stood slowly, brushing her dress, and walked away, not with anger, but with a quiet heartbreak that stung more than any slap. That night, Cato waited outside her hut until the moon rose high. His eyes sore from tears, and when she didn't come out, he returned home, where Babu Tembo sat on a stool by the fire, staring into the flames. "She is gone," Cato whispered. "No," his father replied. "She is grieving the lie you wrapped in silence." Days passed. The village returned to its rhythm, but Cato was no longer the same. He did not ride his horse or stroll through the fields as he once did. He walked. He carried water for the old. He repaired fences for the poor. He helped children with their school slates. And he did it not to be seen, but because her love had taught him that love was service, not sweetness alone. One morning, Cato gathered the elders and requested permission to speak at the village circle. Word spread quickly, and by sundown men and women from all corners gathered under the baobab tree. Nia was there too, sitting at the back, arms folded, face unreadable. Cato stood before them in simple clothes, without jewelry or the staff of his inheritance. "My name is Cato Tembo," he said, "son of Babu Tembo. And I stand before you not as a man who seeks pity but as one who was blind. I mocked love. I feared it. But love did not give up on me. It disguised itself as a girl with rough hands and a heart made of light." He turned to Nia. "You loved without knowing you were being watched. You gave without asking. And I deceived you, not to harm you, but because I didn't know how to be worthy of someone like you." Silence followed his words. The villagers looked from one to another, waiting for drama, maybe rejection. But Nia stood slowly, walked through the crowd, and came to stand in front of him. Her eyes glistened, but her face was calm. "Love is not a performance," she said softly, "and truth is not a game. But even the moon hides behind clouds before shining again. I forgive you, Cato, not because you are your father's son, but because you became a man who learned to kneel." A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by quiet murmurs of joy. The elders nodded, and Babu Tembo smiled with tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. That night, drums echoed through Mba, and laughter danced in the air as villagers celebrated the engagement of Cato and Nia, not with golden rings or diamond robes, but with roasted goat, millet wine, and songs sung by firelight. Weeks passed, and Cato built Nia a new home beside his father's, with a garden full of medicinal herbs and mango trees. But more importantly, he built a life where she could laugh freely, love deeply, and walk in truth. On the day of their wedding, Babu Tembo stood in front of the village, no longer a beggar, no longer hidden, and said, "Wealth is not what fills your granaries. It's who will carry you when you have nothing left." That night, under a sky blanketed in stars, Nia whispered to Cato as they sat outside their home, "You know, I would have loved you even if you were truly a beggar." Cato smiled and kissed her hand. "And I would have lived in rags forever if it meant finding you." And so, the tale of the beggar's test became legend in Mba, told by grandmothers to their grandchildren every moonlit night, not as a story of deception, but as a tale of transformation, of how a father's wisdom and a woman's kindness taught a proud man to love not with his eyes, but with his soul. In the golden years that followed their union beneath the open skies of Mba, Cato and Nia lived not as prince and princess but as partners in soil, sweat, and soul, building a life not marked by luxury but rooted in respect, laughter, and quiet strength. Their love had grown like an acacia tree, weathered, resilient, and always reaching for the sun. The village whispered their story like a sacred lullaby, telling children how love was not in the riches worn but in the sacrifices made when no one was watching. Cato now walked differently, not with pride in his step, but humility in his heart. He still helped fix the old granaries, still played chase with barefoot children, but now he did so with a joy deeper than before, for every act reminded him of the woman who had seen through his masks and stayed. Nia, now called Mama Nia by the village women, had become more than a wife. She was the healer's helper, the midwife's companion, the wisdom many sought when troubles crept like snakes into homes. Their small garden bloomed with medicinal herbs, mango trees, and sunflowers that turned with every sunrise, and laughter echoed from their home like songs from a well-fed drum. But as life blossomed, time crept upon Babu Tembo like shadows lengthening across a dusty path. He walked slower, spoke less, and began sitting beneath the baobab tree for hours, staring at the horizon as though listening to spirits beyond the hills. One evening, as the sun melted behind the mountain and the air filled with the scent of roasting maize, Babu Tembo called his son and daughter-in-law to his side. "My time is folding like old cloth," he said, his voice low but clear. "And before I return to the earth, I must ask something of you both." Nia took his wrinkled hand, and Cato knelt beside him. "Promise me," Tembo whispered, "that when I leave, you will tell your children not just that I was your father, but that I chose to wear rags to test what gold could not see. Promise me you will raise them to know that love is not found. It is revealed. Tears welled in Nia's eyes, and Cato, once a man too proud to bow to emotion, wept like a son clinging to his first lullaby. In the days that followed, the old man grew quieter, his appetite fading, but his eyes never lost their fire. And when the final breath left him one dawn as birds began to sing, he was smiling, arms folded across his chest, as though meeting someone he'd longed to see again. The entire village mourned, not with wailing but with songs of honor. Elders came in lines to sit beside the body and tell stories of how Tembo had once built bridges over flooded rivers and calmed quarrels with a single parable. But the most powerful story came from Cato himself, who stood before the village, holding his father's carved walking stick, and said, "This man wore rags to teach me royalty. He walked among dust so I could rise from pride. And now I ask you all, do not remember him as a man who died, but as one who dared to live with truth." Months later, a child was born to Cato and Nia, a boy with wide, thoughtful eyes and hands that never clenched in fists. They named him Tembo too, and though he was small, he carried in him the quiet spirit of his grandfather. As the years passed, Cato told his son the story again and again, how once a great man dressed like a beggar to find the soul of a true woman, how that woman saved the man's son, and how love bloomed not in riches but in humility. The boy would sit beneath the baobab tree and repeat the words, "Love is not found, it is revealed," until they became his own heartbeat. And so the cycle continued, not with thrones or crowns, but with hearts learning to kneel, serve and rise again. And in the winds that blew across Mba, in the hush of the leaves and the whispers of the river, the spirit of Babu Tembo lingered, not as a ghost, but as a legacy, reminding every soul who listened that true love is the final gift, and only those who walk barefoot through truth are worthy to receive it.